That's good, because that's how long I need. All right, we're ready to go. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's start with agenda. Any additions to the agenda?
Yeah, I think there was a request from Michael and I just to have a word about Snug Cove House. If we could just put that on as other business, I guess, at the end.
Okay, do we have any report or documentation?
No, it's just
or
It's
anything?
just,
Is that what this is?
Well, we have this.
I knew you would.
Yeah.
Just getting ahead of you.
yeah, it's just this, and I think there's gonna be a presentation from, or at least something from Graham about it.
Okay, so this is something I believe requires unanimous consent to add to the agenda.
Yep.
Yeah, okay,
Do we have a problem?
if we did add it, we would put it at the
10.3 or?
end of new business,
Yeah.
or after items from consent. So all those in favor of adding this to the agenda? Okay, those opposed?
No.
Okay, so
No, it's okay. Yeah.
it's okay if we add it? Okay?
I don't know what it is, but I approve of, let's deal with community business. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so Snug Cove
10, was that 10.3?
House is going to be put up, well, it'll be actually, yeah, somewhere in there. It might be after 11,
11.1.
depending on what we get removed from the consent agenda.
There are two on-table items, both pertaining to business licensing in your package, 6.2 L and M.
Right, there's that part of it too, isn't it? Okay. Motion to approve the agenda then?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor, passed unanimously. Now we go to public comments. What have we got today, Tyler?
We have two today. First up is we have Mr. Graham Ritchie regarding the Snug Cove House.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing me to speak and for putting this item on the agenda. I feel my presentation would be a lot stronger if I had some kind of uniform, but we'll have to make do with the cities. I've given you 3 pages of very poorly printed information. This is background information to bylaw 426/2016, which is the rezoning bylaw for the Snug Cove House site at 1080 Miller Road. Since we have now sold most of what we call our enabling lots, which hope to produce just under 50% of the funds needed for construction of the Snug Cove House residence, the first page shows the site except for the Snug Cove House lot, which is much bigger and is to the north, and I couldn't fit it in. So these are just the enabling lots with the Foxglove Lane, which is the central road that has been adopted by the municipality. Since lot buyers, architects have got involved, they have tripped over a stumbling block, which is what I hope will be discussed by you today. That is the exclusion or not of garages from the FSR calculations. We were led to believe, or we believed right from the get-go, that garages were excluded. Subdivision planner Judy McLeod made the proposal for garages that would be excluded from the total area, total buildable area. The rationale for that is she wanted to keep the site clean. This is a very dense site, 12 lots in a very small space. It's all about density. This was seen as an advantage by the municipality of our first bylaw, which was 2008. The 2016 was a revision of the 2008 bylaw. It has since emerged that garages are in fact not excluded. They're excluded from the total area buildable, which is 140 square meters per unit, or approximately it's 1,500 7 square feet. It turns out that the FSR does not exclude garage as part of the calculation. Therefore, if you're a single family, the 6 lots to your right on this piece of paper along Miller Road were zoned single family. The 6 lots to the left that are slightly bigger were zoned duplex. In order to build the duplex, it's tricky. It's a tricky site. The site climbs 40 feet over 200 feet up from Miller Road up to Bowen's Court. So the plan you have in front of you is the as-constructed plan, which shows the exact elevations as they were built. And you can see that on average, the top of the lot, the top 2/3 of the lots to the left, are 33 meters. On average, the road and the sidewalk is 28.5 meters. The differential being 4.5 meters, or 14.75 feet. That represents a real challenge to climb up to the living area. You have to have parking. The bylaw insists we have off-street parking. Every unit has to have 1 space. You can't park on the road. Therefore, you can't have living space in the parking area in front of your lots. So they have to be either a parking space or a carport or a garage. In order to climb up to the living area, you then have to go above the garage. If you turn to page 2, it shows, this is done in 2016, it's a very rough concept, showing how the garages are an integral part of the units. Whether you build a duplex unit or a single family unit, you don't have to build a duplex unit on these top lots. But if you do build either a duplex unit or a single family unit, the garage is essentially the prop for the living space. Now, you could have a carport. A carport is defined as 60% walls only. You could prop up the building with a carport. It would have to be a really seriously skookum carport because you're supporting all that space above. So by the time you put in all the heavy beams and posts and etc., it's pretty well down near the garage anyway. The only difference being you don't have a door at the front. If the door at the front is the one thing that enables the subdivision planner's image of having a tidy lot, it's a tidy subdivision. It's very dense, there's a lot of people there. So putting a garage was a great way of hiding away the cars, the canoes, the kayaks, the wheelbarrows, the pots, the rakes. So the garage is one, it's whether you build 14 feet, if the top drawing shows a 14-foot high garage. The bottom one shows, which is more practical, a 10-foot high garage, and then the front part of the building dropped down a couple of feet. Another reason for the garages was we were worried about this 14-foot or 10-foot climb. If seniors bought any of these lots at the top, they would, at some stage of the game, perhaps need a stairmaster, a stair climber, or these mechanical stair climbers. There are no mechanical stair climbers that we know of that you can have out in the rain, and therefore it needs to be protected by a structure. So that's another reason for the garage. The third page is an extract, lot 2 of our enabling bylaw, 426/2016, with the all-important density information at the top of the page. So the maximum size is listed. Area 3 is the area for the market development. So it's area 3 that we care about, the right-hand column. Maximum size is 140 meters, specifically excluding the garage. So far, so good. The other line, the other 2 lines, the first line is a building envelope, which is not a problem. The second line is FSR, which is a problem. That is total buildable, livable space. That it emerges as of September 11th does not exclude the garage from the calculation. So what it effectively does, unless you want to trade your garage space for livable space, Owen defines a garage, I think, as 8.5.
Graham, you're gonna have to pick it up.
Okay, sorry.
We've got a
All
whole-
right, that's it. Any questions?
Um,
Oh, that's good.
So the point of your presentation is?
Excluding garages from the FSR is really important to the look and nature of this development.
Okay, if I could just throw in the obvious here. So this says maximum FSR for all buildings and structures.
You're absolutely
There
right.
is no limit on the, the limit is 0.85,
Right,
period,
right.
right? So whether it's livable square footage, whether you're excluding it from the house or not, it still becomes a structure on the lot.
Correct.
So if you only have a 140 square feet meter, which is the maximum size for an attached dwelling, on those duplex lots, you could put another 1,000 square feet of other buildings and structures. So in that 1,000 square feet, you can accommodate,
I'm sorry,
Okay, so
where
you-
does this 1,000 square feet come from?
okay, you've got an upper
Maybe we
lot and
should
lower
save
lot.
this for when we get to the agenda item at the end of the meeting.
Sure, fair
Yeah,
enough.
that's probably better.
Let's take that at that. Okay,
And we've
yeah,
got
my
Daniel here
apologies.
and everything else.
Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, Graham.
Okay,
Thank you.
talk to you later.
Okay, Mr. Anton Venable, we've been discussing development variance permit application for 1225 Scarborough Road.
I understand that this time it is on the agenda and not being taken off. Just for the last time speak. I'm a neighbor of Lauren and Gary, who have applied for this permit. Before I start, I'm curious about the underlying issue is that at any point in time was there a legal transfer of title from the Squamish Nation to all the lands on Bowen Island? That's one question I have. And at what point was authority given by the Squamish Nation for municipalities on their former territory to make any decisions when it comes to land use and zoning? When those two conditions are met and I have an answer on those, I would like to add my point to the development variance permit. Although it's being seen as a new house, there has been a house in this location for a very, very long time. So although this concerns a variance on the setback, if that variance were to be given, it would not affect the road, nor the culvert that's running north of the road. I see it basically, if this variance was not to be permitted, that it would push Lauren and Karen into making a lot more cost in preparing the site where the house needs to be moved to. What they're trying to do is to provide for affordable housing for their family, and I would hate to see, especially during election time, that their daughter and their her partner and their granddaughter would be pushed off the island because they cannot find affordable housing. That would be really bad. Bad. So that's really, in a nutshell, what I'd like to bring to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on to the consent agenda. Is there anything anybody would like pulled from the consent agenda?
Do I need to pull the 3.6?
I didn't have a chance to look at your notes this morning, but I'm sure the typos you found correct.
Okay, I'm going to start with Maureen.
3.6,
3.6,
it's just a small one.
and, okay, that is, just bear with me a moment. Electric vehicle charging station, okay. Anything else? Oh, Okay, that's the only thing. Motion to accept consent agenda?
Yeah.
Seconded, all in favor, passed unanimously. So, moving on from that, we have delegations. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Appreciate you guys having me here today. If anybody needs, we're going to go through a police report. It's got a lot of detail in it. If you need a printed copy because the copy on the screen isn't good enough for you, just let me know. We've got a couple copies here.
Would anybody like a copy?
Yes, we do.
Sure.
Thank you. So if you guys are ready, I'm Kara Trance. I'm your officer in charge of Sea to Sky RCMP detachment. So I cover from Pemberton to Bowen Island in terms of my scope of responsibility. And as you guys have probably all met and know very well, Paulo is our corporal who is in charge of Bowen Island detachment. So he's your go-to for your everyday matters. And I'm hoping, I don't think it's been done in the past, but in the communities that I've worked in the past, we've presented our policing report. So take about 10 minutes of your time today, and I'm hoping to do that again in the winter, going forward biannually, just to update you on some of the policing initiatives, and then where we're at with it in your community. So we'll give today's report. You guys can give some feedback to Paulo and or myself. If at any point this isn't working for you and you don't think that it's informative or important, by all means you can let us know. We're open to that feedback. But just in terms of the RCMP detachment and a little introduction, myself, I actually came to Sea to Sky RCMP detachment in November of 2016. You might have met my counterpart who filled in during my maternity leave, was Inspector Jeff Christie. So I don't know if you met Jeff, but he was here for a year in my absence, which was wonderful. I have family, as you would gather from that information, a daughter who's started kindergarten this year, and a second daughter who's about a year and a half now. We are thrilled to be a part of this corridor. Roots in West Vancouver. My grandmother grew up in that area, so happy to be there, and an uncle in Squamish. So it's been neat. I grew up myself in Kelowna and have worked in 8 communities in BC. A little bit about myself, there's more detail there, and you guys can follow along or read at a later time. Any questions, I welcome them at any time. You can reach out. I'd be happy to take any questions personally. So, Bowen Island Detachment, you guys know that you have 3 police officers stationed here. You're a community under 5,000. So you have your policing services provided to you by the BC RCMP as contracted through the provincial government. Other provinces such as Ontario contracts the Ontario Provincial Police, Quebec contracts the Quebec Provincial Police. Here in BC, you have the BC RCMP, and we take a lot of our policing initiatives from those BC directives. So that's an important thing just to follow along as things change in the province. You might find that locally we're also advancing some of our things. Last year there was a lot of information to get our officers educated on fentanyl and fentanyl preventative deaths that we could do, get out to the community, as well as making sure our officers were safe. We're moving more now into the vulnerable persons, education around what we can do to assist people in our young population, mental health, interpersonal violence, things like this. So you'll follow along those BC RCMP initiatives that you'll hear from time to time through the media, through any time you want to look them up on the internet, they're there for you. We mirror our initiatives here locally on Sea to Sky and tailor them to your communities, but off of that kind of directive, I guess is the best way. My office is my office is 50% of the time in Whistler, 50% of the time in Squamish, and I try and make it here quarterly to meet locally with our police officers for training. If Paulo hosts a meeting, I'll come down for it. So it's not a direct scheduled event, but at least 4 times a year I try and make it over to the island, so you'll see me from time to time. My direct report is in Lower Mainland, and you are part of Lower Mainland District, and so we have an office in Lower Mainland, Surrey headquarters, and we respond to them in terms of directive. If you guys need to speak to my boss ever, that's where you would go. So just flipping forward a little bit here to our first, our strategic plan. So the strategic plan is set in April of every year. We consult with our community partners. Often it's agencies like the Howe Sound Women's Transition Center or their women's group. We would meet locally with your community partners we would talk to you as counselors and say, and elicit information. Is there anything that you think is a real priority for your community? And from there, we set those strategic priorities for the year. So we try and set some lofty goals and meet as many of them as we can during the year. And this is the time spent that our police officers are directing their energy and time when they're not out there responding to calls for service. And when they do have a call for service, if they can loop it back into these initiatives as well in terms of follow-up or preventative work, they do that as well. So this is what we call their unallocated time. Gone are the days where we drive around and just look for the criminal who's trying to break into the house. That's not a really effective policing model. That's not really an effective use of our time. You rarely catch somebody doing that, but we try and be intelligence-focused, forward-thinking, getting out into our schools, our community partners, building relationships, and seeing what we can do to prevent crime in that way. So if we look at crime reduction this year, we talk about reactive, proactive, and preventative policing, intelligence-led policing. You guys would have seen some placards or information around Garage 529, which is a program that is geared towards bike theft and trying to ensure that we register as many bikes as possible, and it's a social media-led bike theft prevention. It was designed out of Portland, which we all know to be a bike city, and it's had extremely good results in terms of people, bikers getting other bikers' bikes returned to them. So if your bike is stolen, it goes out on an app and everybody knows the stolen bike. There's a site called Pink Bike where bikes are advertised for sale. It's one of the for sale sites, and they've been able to recover a lot of bikes this way. So we had a lot of bikes here on Bowen Island registered. In our Garage 529, the local community officers here have been in the schools at different events and talking to kids about crime reduction initiatives. So when we think about crime reduction, we're thinking about employing people to make good decisions, but we're also looking at intelligence-led policing. So targeting who our most prolific offenders are and who are the people that are social chronic offenders and focusing our time and energy in that way. You guys might remember that in the spring of this year, we had 3 individuals arrested for a drug investigation. That was in the newspaper. Charges are going forward with that. Very lengthy investigation with a lot of disclosure requirements that need to be met, so it's taken some time to get those charges before county council. But some great work done by the police there in developing intelligence and being able to focus our energies into the drug trafficking there that I understand was a priority for this community. And for those who are looking to get that information in a small town to the police officers who are concerned about reporting, it's always a reminder. We like to remind people that the use of Crime Stoppers is extremely valuable for the police. And it's a great phone call. If you can make a phone call to Crime Stoppers, that's where we would direct anybody who wants to share information with the police but doesn't have the courage to do so in a small community because they're afraid of retribution. A couple of files that I know were probably really key to your community, one of them being around liquor and overconsumption of alcohol that created a violent situation and something that caused a lot of safety and concerns for your community members. So an area where you'll see our police officers being really focused on is the Liquor Control and Licensing Act and making sure that we are serving within the liquor establishments are adhering to service regulations according to the Liquor Control and Licensing Act, where they get their authority to serve liquor, as well as making sure that people who come into the premise are also not highly intoxicated, and so that we can make sure that that's a safe place for everybody to be. You'll see lots of focus on that just to make sure that the community is feeling safe. If we look forward to domestic related violence, and we call this interpersonal violence, in small communities, often the reported crime doesn't marry up with the actual crime. We are acknowledging that interpersonal violence is very much a challenging thing to come forward and report to the police in a small town. And so sometimes our stats can be skewed in this area, as seen from some anonymous reports, anonymous surveys that I've done in other communities of similar sizes. You don't often see the police crime marrying up to the actual stats. And so we just encourage again that community members are seeking community resources in this area, and that the police are there to help in an anonymous manner. So we don't see a lot of domestic related violence here, but we certainly work in a preventative measure in this community when it comes to interpersonal violence. One thing that all of our police officers were trained in the early part of the spring this year was trauma-informed policing, put on by Dr. Lori Haskell. She is renowned for her education in trauma-informed education. So her latest studies show how trauma applied to the policing, how studies on trauma applied to the policing environment can help police officers make really wise investigative choices. And so if you think of somebody who's been assaulted, how they might be reporting to the police, or how they might be articulating something, or their memory. Lori is excellent in her education, so all of our police officers have received this training. And it just allows us a little bit better to understand what people are going through when they are dealing with these situations, and how we as police can respond to them better. I know that there's a lot of advancements we need to make in the RCMP in terms of education in this manner, and it's a very new science in terms of trauma and recollection and memory and court processes. So we're really grateful to have her education. Vulnerable persons. This is a really interesting piece, because this incorporates our youth and decision making, as well as people in the community who are dealing with mental health or substance abuse issues, maybe impacted by trauma that has happened in their life, things like this. So we work to engage community relations, and I had the opportunity to go for coffee with Paula this morning, and I need to know that when I come to your town that I've got to spend an extra 10 minutes if I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee before our presentation, because we needed to stop along the way about 6 times to make sure we shook hands and were introduced to the people in the community. So this to me is when we're actually doing policing correctly, because those community relationships are key to ensuring that we are connecting with the vulnerable people in our community. Those times when we're stopped roadside and say, hey, just so you know, so-and-so down the street has got this going on, it just doesn't seem right. Those are the relationships that are integral. So certainly we'll be pushing all of our police officers that come into this area to be, and I know that's a challenging part about small towns, is we rotate in and out, and having worked small town, not this one, I understand the impact that has on your community, but we will be pushing people to forge through and make those relationships. And also change is a good thing. When we get entrenched in a community, it's also important that we move on and new faces come in. So vulnerable persons is a key for us as well. Road safety. So this is an area where you don't often want to see an increase in statistics. We are happy to see an increase in statistics in this one. In fact, we saw a very high violation tickets and impaired driving related charges this year. So this is what we consider proactive work, where our police officers are out there issuing tickets or warnings or stopping impaired drivers and making sure that we're processing those files. Recently, you guys had an impaired charge that was involving some people who were seriously injured, taken to hospital, and the police are taking investigative steps in that one to secure a search warrant and DNA evidence and proceed with charges in that impaired driving case. We take impaired driving very seriously, and BC legislation has given us the ability to pull people over roadside and deal with things in a quick and efficient manner through our IRP program. So really good work here done on the island locally on that. And of course, speed in some of our key areas like the ferry and the school zones will be where we'll be focusing our times. Responding effectively. Emergency preparedness is integral in a town this size. When you have 3 police officers and you are dealing with things like the risk of interface fires or whatever it might be, if there was tsunami concerns where your community might be impacted by emergency planning, it's key for us that we have preparedness and we have police officers who know what to do. So as I sat here, I noticed you guys have your EOC, really important training. For all of our supervisors, our police supervisors, that they're able to come in here and work in a planning perspective in an emergency, in the event that we have an emergency, that we are prepared and ready to deal with it. The nice thing about being part of Sea to Sky RCMP detachment as an integrated detachment is you guys have a wealth of resources right at the drop of the hat. It takes nothing for me to deploy 15 police officers from Squamish detachment in the event of an emergency and get them down the road in here, because we don't have to do any sharing agreements with, for example, West Vancouver PD, and not to any discredit to West Van or North Van, they would be here in a heartbeat if we needed them as well. But being a part of this detachment, I can redeploy my officers at any time within my jurisdiction and have no sort of funding issues or costing issues to deal with. I can do that internally in my detachment. So right away, as a part of a larger detachment, you have the benefit of additional resources really quickly, should we need them. And then as well as that, you have other police officers if Paulo has taken a day off and he's your person who's trained in your EOC work, and we need to recall somebody into this area who's got that emergency planning and training. We've got some senior officers within the jurisdiction that we can deploy. So lots of work being done in that area. Employee growth and development, really this has got to do with our training of our members. Every year our police officers go to Chilliwack, they every 3 years on their operational skills training, all ranks and all levels. I go this week and I'll be there with some recruits from our detachment as well as police officers from across BC. And the purpose of that is just to do your regular skills training, but you also do your first aid, your regular firearms training, etc. And then we send police officers on more detailed courses like your sexual violence investigators course, your investigative techniques, impaired driving, any of our major areas. Our police officers go to Chilliwack for that training. And then in-house, we try and hold 2 training sessions a year, and that's in Squamish Detachment or Whistler Detachment, and we bring our police officers and our NCOs, our supervisors, in for specific training within house that is pertinent to our area. We bring speakers in for that. So lots that we're doing there in that community, employee growth and development category. Community engagement, as we've talked about this, I don't need to recap on this one, but plenty of work being done here to build and forge relationships in the community engagement piece. And in a small town, I am cognizant of the fact that community engagement and police presence in your parades and your community events, that having us there is really, really important to your community, and so we will continue to support that in any way that we can. And for your perusal at the end, whenever you have the time to look at it, we just included your 2018 Bowen Island crime trends, and I'm hoping as I deliver the winter report in the end of 2018 that we can see a decline in any of the trends that we're seeing thus far this year. And so it just allows us at halfway through the year to kind of look at what our major concerns are, and then curb some of that throughout the year. So just a checkpoint in for us as to where we're going and refocus some of our energy. That's it from myself, and if there's any questions from you guys, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Where did you take your speed?
That's a lot of coffee. But I'm also cognizant, I present regularly to council, and I know what your agendas can look like. So I've been to some evening reports and seen how long these meetings go into the evening. So I do like to get in front of you in case there are any questions brewing in the community, but I don't like to take much of your time. So hence the printed copy.
I'm just going to start, I'll just go around the table.
You bet.
There's Michael.
Listen, firstly, I think I'll speak very well. Thank you very much for the update and the report. And what you've told us here is what you're doing for us.
Yeah.
I have a simple question. When we're not around and you're back somewhere else and you're talking amongst yourselves, and you're thinking, what can we do really to facilitate the things that you're trying to do for us, for any municipality, Bowen or any other? What's your wish list of things that a municipality can do for you?
Absolutely. So things are coming up brought to you either by the community members or people who have stopped you roadside, same thing, with concerns in the community, that you're communicating that with our detachment. Sometimes people are afraid to stop the police and say, hey police, this is our concern. We acknowledge that we wear a uniform and that can be intimidating at times. So if you can be that person that translates some of those concerns through to our local commanders, that's really helpful for us. And then from a planning perspective, as you guys are looking at approval of new things, you're looking at parks and public use spaces, that you're keeping in mind, we are always supportive of really well-planned public spaces and welcome at any point for our police officers to be involved in those conversations. So we call that CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. I'm sure you've all heard about it. But if we can be involved in, hey, there's a new skate park going in this area with the youth, and we really know that this is going to be a great area, we want to be involved in that and just shed a little bit of information on, hey, some lighting in this area would be really great. These kind of things would help us in a policing perspective. So yeah, involving us at the earliest stages. Emergency planning is key. Whatever your community is doing in the emergency planning, ensuring that we are involved in that. If you have meetings or discussions and we can just come and listen in, that's a really important piece.
Paul is on the committee, isn't
He sure is, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so those are three areas that I could think of, and certainly just open communication. As things start to brew and fester, if you think the police need to be involved, part of me coming to appear in person before you is that you know that you can reach out to me at any time and just pop a phone call through or request a meeting with me if there's things that I need to know of. Again, being removed and only coming here twice a year, or four times a year, and presenting to you twice a year. My hopes is that you would share that information if you got it in advance of it becoming a larger issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for questions.
I just had a quick one about cannabis and whether we can expect it. Is there something we can help with? Any changes or things that we should be aware of?
So if your community has not already thought about smoking bylaws, that's one that will probably come up for us the most, that is probably gonna impact, I think, for us has already been, I think from a policing perspective, my personal opinion from a policing perspective is we've been dealing with this for years and are not concerned in what we're gonna see in terms of trends and changes. Where we anticipate seeing kind of some feedback from the community is, hey, we're standing in the ferry lineup and the car in front of me, the passengers are smoking. And so these are things that I think would impact the family behind that's now in the lineup and not really wanting their kids having to be breathing that air, right? Whereas if you're looking at these new legislation, I think they're leaving that up to the municipalities, and a lot of information hasn't been communicated in those smaller intricacies. Where we're doing the planning from a policing perspective is a roadside screening test that we'll be able to test for people who have been impaired by drug roadside. We currently don't have that technology, and we're told that we will have that in our hands by the time that this happens this fall, so that I know there's a lot of work being done on background on that. Through our national headquarters. So from us, I actually don't see a lot of change. I don't think that we're going to see a substantial increase. I think what we're allowing ourselves to do now is have the conversation above table.
Right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
The first one is just sort of a statistical one. I mean, we are a community under 5,000. Do you simply use the census data to determine that?
Yeah, so that's done by the province of BC through census data. And then once the census shows that you're getting close to 5,000, they begin to engage your community in discussions around, hey, you're nearing that 5,000 mark. And by the next census, it looks like you might go over, therefore you've got a 4-year period to plan for the finances around what it would cost to then pay for 70% of your policing. Because when you're between 5,000 and 15,000, you pay for 70% of your policing if you opt with the RCMP, and 30% of it is paid for by the or by the province. If you went for your own municipal police force at the 5,000 mark, then you pay for 100% of your policing costs.
So the seasonal influx of summer visitors has no impact on that?
Great question, because Winter, I did this earlier, Whistler is one of the communities I police, and we deal with seasonal influx in probably the greatest magnitude in the province. And no, we go straight from census data, and that is, that's a provincial contract clause in there. And so certainly we have our, in my discussions with our finance planner, so once you hit 5,000, I would have a very good relationship with your CAO and CFO in order to discuss budget and budget cycles for you. And so I go into budget meetings and I say, hey, you're a community that deals with a significant increase in population in the summer. We need to start planning some of that into our policing costs. So that would be times when you would start having to look at those tourism dollars and putting some of that money towards policing.
Okay. Yeah. And then my second question, I didn't quite understand when you said that there was, this is in the domestic violence discussion, you said there was a mismatch between the reports and the actual statistics. What do you mean?
So the number of reports that the police receive, so our police data, which is where you'll see the crime trends are taken from our police data, versus, and I can't off the top of my head remember the name of the survey that I read, and it was within the last 5 years, but it's a national survey that was, have you been exposed to domestic violence in your house, have you reported to the police, and it extracts the difference between reported violence to the police and in this anonymous form, violence, actual violence, thank you, that's what I was looking for, actual. So just showing to us barriers in reporting. We know that there's a significant barrier of reporting to the police when it comes to domestic violence or interpersonal violence. Violence in relationships is always for us about forming relationships, but also going through some of our third party. We're exploring some different, we have a project up in Whistler as actually been one of the BC named communities to be a pilot project on third-party reporting, which the police have typically not received third-party reports of violence, and now we are accepting those through this pilot project.
And then my last question, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. The Economic Development Committee has been hosting a series of business breakfasts with different sectors of our community, and recently in the meetings with the retail businesses, there was a concern raised about shoplifting.
Yeah.
And from that meeting, it looks as though there was some follow-up done with Paulo. And I really appreciate some of the statistics here. The fact that there were 15 shoplifting cases reported in the last 12 years
Right.
really puts that in context. So thank you for following up on that, Paulo. Thanks.
And Paula was sharing with me some of the work that there is being done in the community between the police and businesses on shoplifting, and so they've gone into the businesses to work with them on what we can do to address some of the issues where there is shoplifting, and how can we help the businesses become informed on preventative measures, et cetera.
Thank you.
Okay. Melanie, do you have anything?
My question was more along the lines of the legalization of cannabis, and I think you did a really good job at sort of talking about some of the things that you're going to be.
I might have more information in the winter report as well, if you guys have me back, but on how things are going with the rollout, et cetera. So, yeah, we're in the early stages, and that's what I have at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just, well, thank you very much for all you do, and we don't see a lot of what you do, which brings up a point that there used to be, in the newspaper, we used to have just sort of a police report every, I don't know, every month or something like that, just to say what was going on in the neighborhood and this and that, and what the different infractions might have been. I think they used to have names in there, or maybe not, but that was a little bit over the top. But yeah, we just, you know, it sets a really nice feel of decorum in the community, and that's one thing we don't, it's just something that's understated, but just the presence itself does, and we thank you for everything you do, Paul. Yeah.
We were just having a discussion this morning about the value of having a media relations trained police officer here in the community, so that we could work maybe with a local Facebook or Twitter account and try and build that there's a lot of stipulations for the police on those accounts in terms of 24/7 monitoring and all of these kind of things. So unique to this community, that would be a challenge, but not one that we're not exploring. So we were just having a discussion this morning about what that could look like for Bowen Island. So I understand that in this community, one of the challenges the police have seen is following along, and the police often read the Facebook chatter online and the Twitter chatter, et cetera, and that information that is being put, and I throw this out there for community discussion just because it is really important, but the information that is being discussed on Facebook does not necessarily mirror the information that the police are receiving in their investigative reports, which are first-hand witness accounts, statements taken from people on scene, victim and physical evidence. And the information and the opinions and the conclusions that are being formed by community members are not necessarily accurate with what we're seeing with the police investigative report and what will be forwarded through to the courts. And so I say that in that it's really important that we rely on some of those media reports that are done, those actual one-off accounts that are put out in the local newspaper on the what's happening for this investigative file, and refer back to that. Okay, the police are investigating, and looks at this point like this person's arrested, and to be arrested you need to have reasonable and probable grounds and evidence to get to that point of an arrest. And so it's just something to be mindful of as we move forward, and we're looking at how we can better inform the community on things that are happening and get involved in some of these community discussions that are happening, knowing that some of them are happening online, and how do we be involved in them, getting the right information out there and the accurate information out there.
Reminds me of a saying of now defunct judge, or no longer with us judge. They opened their mouths with their minds totally devoid of the facts. And hence my dislike of talk shows and things like that. The cannabis and the smoking bylaws, would it behoove us to have a smoking bylaw in your opinion?
If I was a community decision maker around smoking, I would certainly have a smoking bylaw, and it would be in areas that are impacted by the public, and not only for marijuana, but for cigarettes, right? To me, that is it's a public use and enjoyment space, right? And it also allows us to control some environments. So where you have people openly smoking, I think it impacts the people beside you. Whereas you have somebody who's, some of this is going to become really challenging as we move forward, because smoking is going to be permitted in the most recent regulations, but edibles and CBD oil and those kind of things are still coming down the road, is what I understand. So these situations are going to be challenging and interesting as we kind of navigate through them as they unfold. But I think that would really benefit your community. you think about just something like a cafe on the main street and somebody's sitting outside of the picnic tables and they're smoking beside the family that's just having a cup of coffee, how does that impact them? And maybe it won't. Maybe we'll find that people will be more respectful and just move on, and that's great. Canada.
So if we had, who enforces those things?
Do you have a community bylaw officer?
Huh, okay,
So that would be the first point of contact, and at any point that they needed some assistance and needed to partner with the police, then we would be partnering with
so
them.
hopefully a smoking bylaw and some signs that might deter a lot of people, but,
And I would assume in your community charter, the police are also able to enforce your bylaws.
yeah.
So we would
It's
work in
like our
cooperation with them.
anti-idling bylaw that not everybody respects.
Yeah, so it would be a partnership between the bylaw officer and the RCMP.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks, everybody. Just one thing, just to emphasize, maybe I personally think that probably the biggest challenge we have is the social media piece and the need for the police to be able to respond quickly to these conversations that are getting out of control. Right? We don't have very much serious crime here, but when we do, people go wild on social media. The amount of incorrect and false information is staggering. And I appreciate the challenge from your perspective, but if you do have communications people available to you who can quickly respond in a sort of a very flat, neutral way to bring things under control, I think that would be something you could really be helpful to us with that. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Thank you.
We'll follow up on those pieces too.
Yeah.
It's the first. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Oh, where's Dave hiding? Where is he? Just gonna follow, thank you. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Not going to speak quite as fast as the last.
Come on.
Hopefully-
Practice.
Back on track. My presentation today is to ask your approval for a community-built Cobb bus shelter project. It's a joint project of the Bowen Island Arts Council and Bowen in Transition. And basically what we are asking your permission to do is to build a beautiful Cobb bus shelter at Cove Commons. It will be constructed in accordance with Translink standards. It will have a roof. I'll show you a couple of examples of what it might look like in a moment. A roof, 3 walls and benches will accommodate up to 10 people. We will decorate it with artwork by Bowen artists. We will make sure that the foundation and framing is professionally done and an engineer will sign it off. And the most exciting part is the cob walls and the bench will be done by our community members of all ages under the direction and supervision of the Mud Girls. They just published a book, which I have a copy of, but I wasn't able to bring it because everybody wants to borrow it. They've been operating for a number of years. They are extremely professional. They do outstanding work, and their stuff is renowned all over the area. So the advantage of this is that this will be a community driven project, and that's where the magic in it lies. So the benefits, obviously, it'll provide some shelter from the weather. It will showcase natural building options and techniques, and our plan is to do this in conjunction with Bowen in Transition's annual sustainability tour or biannual sustainability tour. So what the theme of next year's sustainability tour will be is alternative natural building techniques, and there's quite a few on Bowen Island that have been used. So we'll be driving people around and showing them this, and they'll be able to get their hands involved in this, in the actual construction, and then following it, in the 2 weeks following it, there is going to be a workshop. One of the property owners on Bowen Island is actually having the Mud Girls do a workshop where they're going to build a tiny house on Bowen Island. So people that want to learn more about these kinds of techniques will have a chance to get involved in that as well. It will showcase artistry from Bowen Islanders right in the front of the gallery. We'll be able to learn some new skills, and the most important thing is we'll be able to, and this, I've had experience with this, it's just magic. to be able to have kids, you know, going by and say to their visiting grandparents, look, Grandpa, we did that. It's really an important part, I think, of growing up. And even adults who think that they can't do anything with their hands will say, look, we did that. It's an enormous benefit to the community. The timeline is, the Mud Girls have confirmed they're available for the project in August. It would be the latter part of August. We don't have an exact date yet. They have confirmed that they can meet TransLink specifications with that, which we've been working with Emma, and the municipal staff have confirmed that it will work with the entire Cardeña Road project, the timeline and the project work to be done with that. Tina, on behalf of the library, has given us a letter of support. It should meet TransLink requirements for them to fully fund it. Bowen and Transition is going to backstop any costs that are not covered by that. So the plan would be that in the spring, the foundation and framing would be done, and the actual workshop would be 3 days in August of next year. In terms of its conformance to municipal plans, the bus shelter is part of the Bowen Transportation Plan, element 10. And encouraging alternative transportation is part of policy 30 of the OCP. The project is consistent with the goals and the timeline of the Cardeña Road improvements. The project budget is $7,000, and that includes framing, roofing materials, and the training and supervision by the Mud Girls. And the Arts Council may decide to also pay a commission for art for the face of the shelter. We have some high-level specs from the process of getting more detailed specifications, so we have a series of drawings from the Mud Girls to scale. We have obtained from TransLink all of the requirements in terms of setbacks and widths and requirements for construction. And we have also been through in detail the Cardeña plans in terms of exactly what will be in place, and we're convinced that we'll be able to have those all working together. This is an example of a Powell Rivers Cobb bus shelter. Ours is going to be a little fancier than this in that it will have walls on the side and back, but it won't be as fancy as this. In May of this year, New Westminster unveiled as part of its program an extremely fancy bus shelter. So we're going to try and find the sweet spot in between the Powell River one, which is probably not enough to shelter people from the elements in our winters, and but we're not aiming for anything quite this fancy. So next steps, if you are in approval, is to work with the municipality to make sure that we're coordinated with the Cardeña improvements and that they're on schedule, and if they fall behind schedule, we'll have to adjust ours. But the project qualifies for TransLink funding, and that the bus bay and foundation, which is part 5 of the Cardeña improvements, are in place in time for the shelter construction. We will be finalizing the budget schedule and work plan with the Mud Girls within the next month or so. What we haven't decided is whether or not the framing will be done by them or by local contractors. I don't have a strong preference one way or the other, so I think what we probably will do is find out if there are local contractors who'd like to do the work. And if they would like to do the work, we'll have the local people do it first. And if we can't find anybody that will do it for the kind of budget that the Mud Girls will do it for, then we'll get them to do it. And we will be starting to publicize the workshop and engage the community in this, both in terms of the idea of the project and actually inviting people to the workshop to get them involved on a very hands-on basis. And we will be reporting on a regular basis on the progress of the project and communicating our findings. That's it. Any questions?
Well, thank you. It sounds like a very creative approach to utilitarian kind of thing like a bus shelter, which I think we do need there. My question relates to Remembrance Day. and the parade at Bowfest, and the kind of use that Cardina Corners area has as a kind of public square with the cenotaph and the ability to gather so many people together for ceremony. And I'm just wondering if, I was wondering if it could be, if this had been part of the decision about the walls. Because I can see, I had been envisioning something kind of transparent, so that people could see through it and people could stand and because that area there has a, we don't really have a public open space plan. And I'm afraid, as a member of the library board, I've seen a number of requests and options, and I'm not speaking for the library board, but just over the years, we've seen sculptures appeal here, and people want to put kiosks and signs and events happen, and it's, we just don't have a plan. So I just wonder if you've been thinking about that, public open space, the Remembrance Day.
Well, Cove Commons, my understanding is Cove Commons does have a plan for the development of the whole area here.
Yeah.
And the bus shelter is a pretty small part of that. I don't think the fact that it's opaque is actually going to be kind of blocking.
How big is it? I see 10 people.
The minimum size is 3 meters by 8 meters, and I believe ours will be slightly larger than that, but not significantly. So it's basically 10 people standing up.
Right.
I can't remember how much the seating is. I think it depends on exactly how large we want to make the bench. So it's not going to be an imposing structure by any stretch. But I think it's a good point, but I think that point needs to be raised as part of the decision as to how that whole outdoor area outside the Cove Commons is going to be developed. And I understand they're still at fairly early stages in that, but I can certainly pass along to them your request.
That would be great. It's just thinking about the bigger picture kind of idea.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, okay, I'm gonna go to Melanie and then Allison, okay?
So I really love this. I think this is sort of the missing piece on the corner there. So I'm really happy you're bringing this forward. So thank you very much. And it's great to hear that you've already liaised with staff in regards to qualifying for TransLink funding, because reading through their requirements, there's quite a few. So my question though is, I love it, the fact that it's organic, it really fits with sort of the Bowen ethos and everything. But in regards, I was just questioning, how have you given any thought to integrating sort of technology, lighting, and the fact that TransLink is really going in terms of technology driven? We've perhaps got a dynamic bus shuttle coming through, which will be sort of more app-based. So has there any been thought about how to integrate technology display, like the electronic display signs or things like that? Because this will be the gateway. This bus stop is really the gateway to transit on the island. So there needs to be some sort of marriage between those two. So that's my question.
We haven't thought about it so far. Our main concern has been the fact that there is, even for small bus shelters like this, is a very onerous set of requirements for people who are visually or physically handicapped. And our priority has been making sure that we meet those requirements. But it raises the interesting question as to whether, Bowen and Transition is very much for resilient and sustainable construction. So maybe there's the possibility that we could introduce some kind of solar into this as a means of kind of showcasing technology and reinforcing this idea of sustainability. So I don't know whether it will fit within the budget, but I'm certainly willing to explore it.
It might not be something that we, that can be incorporated right now, but maybe just sort of thinking about how it can be future-proof. So as TransLink goes along sort of that line of becoming more technology-based, it can be at some point integrated into. So I think the idea of, solar panels and.
I know they're also moving to the idea of having the digital readouts that will show you when the bus is.
That's the sort of thing I'm thinking about, and how do we incorporate that into this type of design?
Well, when we're talking to TransLink, we'll ask them about that, because that's their technology. There's no reason why it wouldn't be compatible with this. The question is, how we compile it. And again, that's a question I guess we'll have to figure out with Cove Commons. what would be involved in running power to it from the Cove Commons. Thanks.
Just a quick question, I think we do need a bus shelter there, and it's not gonna be entirely enclosed, I mean,
Right, it's gonna be enclosed on 3 sides.
but all the way to the ceiling or just part way out?
I'm not entirely sure.
Just thinking of a safety perspective, I think people would prefer to have a little bit of translucency or openness, and that's probably in TransLink specs too, because I've never seen a bus shelter that's, floor to ceiling, fuller roof walls.
Right, most of them are glass, and
Yeah.
most of them are glass, and they have an opening at the bottom and the top, but it's just basically enough for
Yeah,
ventilation more than anything
yeah,
else. It's
well,
not-
partly for that, and then if you look at the Paul River one,
Right, yeah, it's a much more open concept,
Yeah.
and it was done
but
very
we may need
inexpensive.
something to protect the rain given around here.
Yeah,
but if,
exactly,
you know,
so we need to.
They don't make
walk that
translucent
line.
mud walls, but
Yeah.
some way to
And
build
I
some of
should
that in.
stress the fact,
Yeah.
people have this idea that cob is kind of a casual, cob isn't, they've been using it for centuries. It's an extremely resilient and durable.
Well, one of the mud girls, Jen Gobby, lives on Muskeeter, she did, I don't know, I think she still does. But she was on Islands Trust Council with me, and she,
Oh, great.
yeah, so it was interesting to talk with her.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to Maureen now and then to Gary.
Oh, I just had one more, next
Sorry.
steps, I'm assuming next steps will just be a staff report to approve the partnership agreement and the application to TransLink for the funding. And
I
that
think we're probably gonna need a motion to,
refer to staff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Maureen?
I'm really pleased to see this come forward, Dave. I know that it's been in the works for a while.
3 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the alignment with the sustainability tour next year and its emphasis on alternative building, I think, is terrific. I am, though, trying to imagine what it will be like down there. If the framing and the foundations, remind me of the schedule for that? You would be
The
doing that in
framing
the
and
spring?
the foundation is scheduled, the bus, like the pull-in, and the foundation is supposed to go in the spring of next year. So as soon as that's in place, we would do the foundation work. And then what the community would be involved in is actually building the walls and the bench. And I will admit that that is likely to be, for a short term, a messy process.
But, I mean, what I was thinking is it's probably going to coincide with a larger messy process, given the work that has to be done down.
Right.
Yeah, so, short-term pain. Finishing it off in August makes me a little worried. I know it's good timing with the sustainability tour, but it's also the height of our tourism season. Given all that, I still support it. One of my questions was about maintenance. How do you maintain a Cobb bus shelter?
Basically, it requires almost no maintenance. That's the value of it. The Powell River one apparently was built a number of years ago, and there hasn't been any need for it. So I would presume that, the primary maintenance is actually going to be the frame and the roof, if, to the extent that and it will be designed to be as, weather resistant as possible.
And would the roof be sympathetic with the Cove Commons and the library, or what kind of roof were you imagining?
I think that's up to us. We're imagining basically something very simple, which would be sloped in one direction to let the rain run off. But, there's been some suggestion that we could actually have a garden and grow plants on top of it if we wanted to do that. I think.
Are we gonna have a
Probably.
goat too?
No, I don't think I think for the time being, I think we're gonna go simple as possible.
Okay, thank you.
You can be surprised by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gary?
Well, I think it's fantastic, Dave, and I think it ticks so many boxes, collaboration, community involvement, the organic materials that are going into it, the whole thing. I see it as a piece of art, which I think is gonna be fantastic outside the Cove Commons. I don't think you're gonna have any problem getting local contractors to come and help you with the framing. as
Oh,
far as the
sign
public,
up.
as far as the public is concerned, be careful what you wish for. There's gonna be probably 100 or 200 people down there all wanting to be involved with this. I think it's gonna be fantastic.
That's
I think
actually
it's
gonna be
gonna
our largest challenge.
Yeah.
Is to manage the
Yes,
number of people that I think
absolutely
are
correct.
gonna be wanting.
I think it's great. I love the idea of solar. Solar isn't expensive anymore and it's extremely efficient. And if we can put that into it, that's just icing on the cake. As far as the tourists in the summer is concerned, I think they'd be extremely interested in the project. So I think it's just a win-win all the way around. Thank you.
Well, do you have a motion that we could ask to move this along?
Yes, I believe it'd be most appropriate for council to make a motion on council instruct staff to bring forward a report and recommendation for the installation of the call bus shelter on Gardena Road, on the proposed call bus shelter.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, and seconded. Can I just call the questions if you want to move along? All in favor? Carried, passed unanimously.
Awesome. Thanks,
Good,
Dave.
thanks, Dave. There, we're off and running. Thank you very much. Okay. Judy. Health clinic, first reading.
Morning.
Morning.
So you will recall that back in April, when the Bowen Island Health Clinic, Health Center Foundation came forward and was looking at working with the municipality to obtain a lease agreement for the property on the road, that council at that time directed staff that once we had confirmation of the charitable status being received by the CRA, that we would move forward with a number of initiatives, and one of them was that we would move forward with an amendment to the Village Commercial 1 zone to actually clarify that a medical clinic would be a permitted use on the property. So this is simply a text amendment that would apply to the, that's just the council direction, which I talked about, to the VC1 zone. The VC1 zone is a little bit bigger than the proposed site. It applies to the southern portion of Lot 3 of the community lands on Miller Road, and as well to properties along the south side of Bowen Island Trunk Road. But as a text amendment, this would just be an additional permitted use of medical clinic. None of the other regulations would change, with the exception that we would ensure that there would be a parking standard applied to it, which is essentially consistent with the parking standard that would apply for offices and restaurants and retail and the other uses, which would be one space for 40 square meters of floor area. So the recommendation in front of you is is that bylaw number 468, 2018, which is be read a first time and be referred to the usual Islands Trust, the Advisory Planning Commission, Metro Parks, and Urban Departments, and that we would report back.
Okay, can I have a motion for that? That effect, moved and seconded? Okay, any questions for Judy before we call the question?
One, was there any appetite or discussion of reducing the parking requirement?
I think on the property for the proposed health center, I think we're able to find sufficient parking, and I can, in the report this afternoon, we can review that. And in my experience in working with such facilities in other municipalities, I think that medical clinics do require that amount of parking. You have people coming for appointments, you have people waiting for appointments, you have staff. So I don't think that reducing parking would be advisable on that type of use.
Okay. So all in favor? And that's passed unanimously. Just picking up the pace a little bit here.
That might have been 15 minutes.
Okay, next up we have Daniel. Business licensing, oh, my favorite.
Just as quick as you need to take a look at this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you. So we're talking about business license bylaw, so bylaw 465. So I just have some background. So 2004, when Bowen Island last talk about business licensing bylaws, so a motion to direct staff to develop a bylaw. Never brought forward. Under this council, in July of 2016, council directed the EDC to review business license feasibility. The EDCs started a task force and they reported back in November of 2017, so they presented a report to council recommending business licensing. And then July of this year, staff then brought a report and a bylaw, and council granted first reading to that bylaw. So bylaw 465, what's in the bylaw? So in the proposed bylaw, every business on board would be required to obtain a business license and to renew those licenses annually. So to acquire a business license, there are steps so businesses would show compliance with the land use bylaw, with other applicable Bowen Island bylaws, and any letters or certificates of approval from the appropriate authorities. And I just include the definition there. What is a business? So in the bylaw, business is the carrying on of an undertaking of any kind or nature for the purposes of gain or profit. And this is not super readable. It's essentially the things that we exempt from requiring a business license. So things like garage sales or buskers, fundraising activities, what else we talked about? Utilities, performance, concert, exhibition, entertainment for a charity purpose, or in a location where the operator already holds a license. The renting of single-family dwellings, secondary suites, duplexes, or rooms, and so that was proposed as sort of a, phase 2 consideration is being a landlord essentially inside a business. So it's proposed currently to be exempt. Non-resident business, doing things like bringing goods to another business within the municipality. And then down here, a person who pays a user fee to a farmer's market organization to participate in a farmer's market. And then, so part of the directive from council and the EDC was essentially try to keep the categories limited and the fees low and straightforward. So some municipalities, when you look at their bylaws, they end up with these great massive schedules of how you calculate exactly what business you fall under and how that relates to what fee you pay and how big is your business and number of it and all this stuff. And so essentially, instead what we propose is, in essence, most things would either be a commercial business, and what you think of like a storefront would be a commercial business, it'd be $125. If you run a bed and breakfast, you're the $100 category. If you're a contractor, so you are based on Bowen, you're doing work across the island, you're a contractor, or you're a non-resident business. This would be if you're somebody who is off island and coming on to Bowen to do similar things to that. And then we have a home-based business in 2 categories broken out to, if you have public access, then we define that as regular business hours open to the public. So if you're running business out of your home and people are coming on a regular basis, you're open for the public to come. Using that category versus if you're a home-based business with non-public access, so that you don't have regular business hours, you're operating out of your house, you essentially have a lesser fee to go with that. So some of the so the finance committee discussed it over email, would say from the finance committee members. So we had a meeting scheduled, I think, for last Monday, but it got postponed, so we did it over email to bring comment back to council. Mixed support, so concerned expressed with the need for the bylaw, and they did it, would there be full cost recovery in the business license program. Held an open house September 13th, so I say approximately 15 to 20 people attended. I'm always hesitant to give an estimate of how many people supported or not. I'm not actually asking them to sort of tick yes or no. But I would estimate over half the people there supported the bylaw. But some of the criticisms include, so business owners saying that they see little benefit, especially business owners who say they operate in their house and people aren't coming, why do they need a business license? Other topic came up, fairness for business licenses for people thinking what they do as a hobby, sometimes to make revenue from. Concerns from the finance committee, are the fees going to cover the cost, or is it going to be borne by the general taxpayer? So at the time of writing, we received 9 letters, and I see 2 more on table. So similar to comments from the open house, so the home-based business with no public access, what's their compelling reason to be required a business license? And then again, the small-scale businesses, so poetry, writing, creative arts, contract work out of your house. So the communication committee met to discuss this, I think on Wednesday of last week, and looking at the rollout, so looking at our proposed schedule would be at this meeting on October 9th for consideration and adoption from council move forward, and looking at the timeline of developing sort of applications and education material for implementation January 1st. And so we proposed that, we worked out a timeline of opening applications sometime in mid-November to looking to start, so people would have their business license in January 1st. And after quite a bit of discussion, sort of working through the logistics of it, thinking that a better plan is actually to work on fully implementing stuff to start accepting applications starting in the new year. with the understanding and even support from council that enforcement then wouldn't begin until the spring of 2019. So I think that in essence we could have an application system up and going by this fall. You know, and we would be doing it and it would be in effect January 1st, but we would rather actually take the extra couple months to make sure that the system's all fully set up so that when we actually launch, people will be able to, you know, can fully explore things like paying online or applying online, things that we currently don't have for our current, like a planning application or something. There's no online option. You're doing a PDF and you're sending them a check or something, but trying to find some way to make it as simple as possible for businesses. And the other piece then is that a key piece of this and a key benefit the EDC saw was like online business registry. And so if you look at various municipal websites, there's a big range of how that online business registry works. So some places essentially will print the PDF and they'll say the PDF of their list and they'll post that up every 6 months or quarterly or whatever. And people can look. And others have a much more interactive thing where you can search by category. So if you want to know who are the plumbers who can work on Bowen, you can actually search plumbers and you'll get a list of plumbers and their phone numbers. You can contact them. But so we'd like to do a little more research into that and actually budget for the costs of that in the 2019 budget, but have that ready to go in January as well. So similar to this, we're just asking people to apply at some point. We can show them this is what it's going to look like. And so from the open house, have a recommended amendment. This is in your council agenda as well, but essentially amending that exemption of farmers market. So some comments were people saying, well, you know, you exempt the farmers market, but what if I'm going to the craft market? Are you going to be policing? Here's the bylaw officer going to go around the craft market and knock on every stall and say, where's your business license? And so we said, no, that seems fair to say, okay, the intent is there. It's a farmers market, or the farmers market or the craft market holds the business license, or is then something that is exempt from needing a business license, or a nonprofit or something, or a, or something else that's somehow exempt or has a business license, that would be a permitted thing. And then to recommend going forward with second and third reading with those amendments.
I'm going to jump in first if I may.
Well, I've got a couple of
The technical
comments,
questions on-
technical questions.
Okay.
I sent Daniel an email, I was reading this last night. We took out in 5I, we took out the words, if the rental agreement is subject to the Residential Tenancy Act. We shouldn't have, because Airbnb and short-term vacation rentals and all that stuff, or B&B, is the renting of the single-family dwelling or a secondary suite. So, but rather than putting in rental agreement, just have it say the renting of a single-family dwelling, secondary suite, duplex, or rooms therein, if it is subject to the Residential Tenancy Act. Because you don't have to have the rental agreements are verbal or whatever. So the reason we took it out is we didn't want to ask everybody for a hard copy of their rental agreement. So that needs to go back in there. And
So
the
just,
other,
may I just jump in? So that's just to clarify
that it's,
that if it is subject to the Residential Tenancy Act, it is exempt.
it's exempt, but it doesn't give Airbnbs and short-term vacation rentals an argument to say, well, we're renting, so we're exempt. In 5.1, sub 2, it's an operative or retail business delivering or picking up items sold by the retail business. Is a manufacturer a retail business? Because window manufacturers, truss manufacturers, they usually deliver the stuff over here for a building site. So I'm wondering if we need to put in the wording an operator, a retail or manufacturing business. Because you separated manufacturing underneath, but
Yeah.
only delivering to merchants, not
Yeah.
to homeowners.
Yeah, I follow you. So I mean, because it's, if you're delivering stuff for
A job site.
a job site, then
Yeah.
the assumption I guess would be that either it's delivering to a contractor who has a business license, so the contractor is doing it, or to the homeowner.
Yeah.
And you're saying so that, but for a job site as opposed to,
To the building center.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the contractor's not reselling it, because
Yeah.
the homeowners could be paying for it.
yeah,
Yeah. So I couldn't see a downside to adding it.
yeah,
So putting the words after in 5.1, little two I's, an operator of a retail or manufacturing business, delivering or picking up items sold by the retail or manufacturing business. Would just make it
Yeah.
clear. And then there's a small, I think in number 6, license periods, it would read better if it said the period of the annual license begins January 1st and ends and expires December 31st, so it's consistent wording. And number 10, all fees collected by the license, this is for you, Raj. All fees collected by the license inspector shall be paid forthwith to the chief financial officer, who shall deal with the said fees in the manner provided by the act. What act? Are we talking about the community charter? And why don't we just say all fees shall be payable to Bowen Island municipality,
We can say that.
which is real simple.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't have any objection
And
to
I,
that.
you know, I didn't know which one of us you were gonna take on the trip with you.
What was the wording again that you?
All fees shall be payable to Bowen Island municipality. Okay, I think that was mine. There's a couple of small typos, but those don't, and a small clarification in 16. 16 talks about beginning of each licensing period. And the definition in 6 is license period exempt. So I think we need to change that to the beginning of each license period.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if we need a more, this is one for you, an as in number 11, the application for a license shall be in the form or forms as prescribed from time to time?
It's probably clearer to say as
Yeah.
prescribed.
Okay. And just so people in partnerships are realize they're getting a deal because they're only paying one fee in Vancouver, I always paid my, we all individually, they collected licensing fees from 26 of us. So, when we were partners in the CA firm.
Okay. Does that cover up your
I
points?
think that's all my technical stuff.
Okay, now, if I can just jump in for a minute.
I wanted to get that out of the way before.
Thank you. We appreciate it. I know there's strong approval on council other than myself for this one. And I'm trying to reconcile myself with what's the real value of this to this community, especially reading all of the feedback that we've gotten from people. And so, first of all, I think that from the traditional reason for business licenses was to regulate location, nuisance, undesirable things, and there were regulations that went along with it. We don't have any regulations in the wings waiting to go into effect. Putting in business licensing so that someday we can put in regulations, you know, makes no sense to me. If you've got no regulations, no need for enforcement, no problems you're trying to solve. But I think that what we could sell this is the fact that we live in a data-driven world. Everything now, you know, dealing with TransLink mirrors and stuff and getting all these brilliant people in there, everything is nuanced information that we're gleaning from this, that, and the other thing that nobody ever appreciated how important that was. You know, like traffic jams because of how fast your cell phone little blue dot is moving, all of that sort of stuff. So I think there's in a sort of post-materialism business environment, there is a reason to want good data. And good data does come from collecting it within the community. But I think that a couple of things that would soften this is, one, we don't need a licensing period of 1 year. I mean, who made that one up? I mean, that's just been around forever. There's no intrinsic logic to saying, well, you have to pay us another $100 every year. You've been in that same location for the last 10 years. You know, nothing's ever changed. You tick same as before box and give another $100. I think that a longer licensing period for your would not be a problem, whether it was 2 years or 3 years or whatever. You could update your data frequently enough, given the number of rollover we have. And the other thing is, I would suggest that you have initially a free sign-up period. It's a fillable PDF form online with the municipality. Everybody who voluntarily registers their business by the 15th of March 2019 pays nothing for the initial licensing period of 2 years or whatever. Try to get compliance, because from what I see, people are going to say, well, when you catch me, that's when I'm going to sign up. And what I do in my basement that you know nothing about, that I'm selling to people in Arizona, you're never going to catch me. So the data's not there. You're not collecting the data. It's better to get the data for free. And don't worry about regulating the guy telling stuff to people in Arizona out of his basement. Anyway, those are my suggestions for a way of softening this to all of those people who did come out to oppose this bylaw. Right. So anyway, Maureen, you were next.
I'm just thinking through the implications of what you just suggested. Part of the problem of what you've suggested in having an initial free period is that by law, this program is required to be revenue neutral and cost recovery.
Right.
So if there were an initial free period, essentially the general taxpayer is going to be paying for this program. So that's problematic from a legal perspective, is my understanding. The transition period that you suggested, when this initially came before council, the full report back in November of last year, there was an expectation that this would move somewhat more quickly than it has. And what the task force had recommended was that there be an initial 6-month transition period between July and December of this year. So when we reviewed in our meeting earlier last week, the communications plan, it was really clear that trying to get something in place with firm enforcement by January of the coming year was just going to be brutal for staff. And it also would mean that we would have that great rush of people who did want to comply, putting in all of their documentation and all of their questions in roughly a 1-month period. So there is still a transition period that's recommended in this report in the communication plan, but it's a 3-month period and the fees still apply. People can take up until April or so to get everything sorted out, but it's not a free period that's being recommended. The other thing that's sort of running concurrently with this is, if you recall, we made a proposal to a grant application to the Rural Dividend Fund to have in place an economic development officer to work over the next 2 years. Part of that proposal states that the EDO, if we're successful with the grant application, would be working during a time when we are implementing the business licensing program. So those two things are somewhat linked, hopefully, assuming we get the funding. So I'm supportive of what Daniel has presented here, and I'm in agreement with the amendments that Councillor Morris has proposed. There were a couple of things that I wondered about that I was thinking it might make things a bit more palatable. The home-based businesses that have non-public access and the fee that's associated with that. I wondered if some adjustment of the fee level might be appropriate. Part of the public access home-based business, that has to do with traffic, it might have to do with impact on roads, make a long list there. If the non-public access fee were further reduced, possibly even to zero, I don't know whether council would support that, but it might make it more palatable to those folks. Part of the reason for wanting that information is that we have no data at all on business failures on Bowen. We simply don't know. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence. We can see when a retail store closes or when the shop changes hands, but we don't know about those little entrepreneurs that are working in their basement. We don't know what they're doing. We don't want to know a heck of a lot about what they're doing. It just would be nice to know a bit more about a segment of our local on-island economy that has potential for growth. And if this fee is going to prevent us from getting that source of data to help us figure out how to support those people, how to help market them, then I would consider supporting dropping the fee to zero. The other question I had, and this came up in some of the feedback from the, I believe it was from a committee member in EDC, was a question about the proposed amendment that's in the recommendation. A person who pays a user fee to a farmer's market. The suggestion there was to add licensed farmer's market or craft market organization. I'm assuming that we were expecting that a farmer's market and a craft market would be licensed.
I think we've exempted them, haven't we?
If they're a nonprofit organization. And we've exempted them not from licensing, but we've exempted them from payment. So I
think that works. Like I think there's some things that would be exempt from needing a license. So you could, if you are, well, like a municipality, for example, is exempt, right? So if we ran a farmer's market, we wouldn't need a business license to do it, but we'd probably read that into it anyways to say, well, we're licensed, we're exempt from licensing, I guess. But really, it can't be like a rogue farmer's market that would require a business license.
So can I just confirm, are you suggesting that it is a good idea to put licensed into the recommendation, or do you think it's understood?
So my question is the farmer's market that happens at Fix, does that have a license?
Well, they don't have a business license because they don't have a business license. And then I guess I'm not clear who, so if the organization is a provincial or federal government or agency of the government, so it's the school board running a farmer's market, they would be exempt. Or a craft fair. If it's run by a non-profit, then they would need a business license. They would pay $0 for it. And I guess maybe it's unnecessary because if somebody ran a farmer's market that needed a business license, we still wouldn't go after the stalls in the business market. We would go after the organizer of the farmer's market and say, you need a business license, and then everybody else doesn't need one.
Okay, so,
Fundraising activities by a nonprofit don't need a license.
Yeah.
So
So the nonprofit does. Like a nonprofit operating on Bowen, but I guess I'm a nonprofit from off Bowen coming on.
Well, no, it says the following types of businesses do not require a license.
Yeah.
Type.
fundraising activities held by a nonprofit organization.
Right, but I'm saying so a nonprofit organization in general that's operating on Bowen needs a business license, but their fee is $0. But then their fundraising activity doesn't, right? So if all they did was fundraising, then they wouldn't need a business license. But if they're just generally a nonprofit that does fundraising,
Still zero.
they would need a business license, they shouldn't pay for it.
Okay, I'm going to go to Gary first.
Just a clarification, I just wanted to, so the CSA runs the Christmas market.
Okay.
So under this, does the CSA then have to apply for a business license to hold the Christmas market? To
They
give
would-
exemption to all
Call that a fundraising activity.
Let's
That's
let
fine.
Daniel answer the question.
So again, I think so there's some things that are exempt. So a fundraising activity by a nonprofit is exempt if it's
Exempt,
required. But if the CSA does other things, they're a nonprofit society that's registered that does things other than just a fundraising piece. Then they would say they do need a business license, but they don't pay anything for it.
Right, so
And then-
they are fundraising, so they are not required. So they're doing it for fundraising, so they
Yeah.
wouldn't be required.
Yeah.
So then we look at the farmer's market that happens, I don't know who actually runs that. Does anybody know here?
The farmer's market?
Yeah.
I think it might be partly us, because we fund part of Sarah's position as community education, or whatever that's called.
I think it's the Bowen
Coordinator.
Agricultural Alliance.
Are we going down a rabbit hole here, guys?
Yeah.
Wait, I was just
Yeah.
wanting to see how this applies, if we're trying to capture all these small little hobbies, right, to give them exemption, does it accomplish what we're trying to accomplish here? That's what, those are our two main areas, right? So that was all I was trying to clarify, that currently as it's set up, those who participate in those two activities would be exempt. Am I correct?
Okay. Okay, Gary and then Allison.
Yeah, I think we gotta go back and look at the reasons why we're decided to put business licensing in. It's a tool in our toolbox. If we don't have people with business licenses on Bowen, we cannot control whether they're doing it healthfully. Vancouver Health is in there, and that sort of thing, and they're doing it properly, and we don't have the ability to say, well, you know what, you can't do that anymore, because they say, well, why not? You don't have business licenses, and that is the only tool we have to say, hey, come on, let's conform, let's do what you're supposed to do here. I think the biggest problem with this, and any of the responses that I've read, there seems to be a lack of communication here. Because this isn't a draconian thing to go out, it's not gonna make any money. It's totally tax neutral, not tax neutral, but fee neutral. And we're only doing it as a data measure, and that's what I'm trying to get through to people is this, we're not here to control you, we're not here to create more government. It's data, it's good government, and it's a tool in our toolbox to manage the businesses on Bowen. And I think that's about it. It's also, we don't have to get all the little bits and pieces here. There's going to be things that evolve as we go along. It is a living document, and it could be subject to change in the future if it is too repressive in some areas.
Okay, Allison?
We've been at this for years, and I think it's something we do need to do, as the report says, and not just because everybody else does it, but because people phone up and say, do you have business licensing? And we say no, and they then think that's open sesame to do whatever you want. And having a business license will enable some of the control of some of the noxious things happening. I was just reading through the North Vancouver home-based business little folder that I picked these things up as I've been going around. And one of the things they say, you shan't do explosives sailor, hotel, or manufacturer handling of weapons or explosives in your home. Well, I'd kind of like to know if somebody was going to set up a business next door and start doing that. So it gives us the control that way, and it gives us the data we need to apply for a lot of these grants, and as Maureen says, to help the businesses. Now, Dave Pollard, in his submission, dealing with Murray's question, made an excellent comment about charging an application fee and then waiving it for the first 3 months or 6 months, which will encourage voluntary application. But it also helps with that initial upfront cost of just processing and dealing with all the applications. So I actually kind of thought, and I do recall, I think others do that. And then it's only the one-time thing,
If I could respond to that, it's not common in the small communities that we looked at.
Okay.
If you're in a larger community, yes, and they often have very complicated schedules, but we didn't see that in the little communities.
Yeah. So both of our experiences of having licenses in larger communities.
Anything else, Allison?
Well, and I'm not in favor of waiving it totally.
Okay.
I don't think, because of, matching the dollars. That was a big concern from the finance committee, was this shouldn't be a burden on the general taxpayer. And if we don't raise enough revenue in the licensing, then it will be a burden on the general taxpayer. The other question was, is there something in here, if you don't apply for a license and you're running a business, do you just get fined? Or is it a double fee for your license because you didn't apply?
That's one of my questions.
Like a stop work order.
Does Daniel know?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
So sure, so it's, yes, Sue Ellen, then Maureen, then Michael.
Okay, I'm in favor of the motion. Generally, I'll probably be voting that way, depending on what else everybody says. I don't know if I'm in conflict of interest as somebody who runs a little business. Maybe I should be recusing myself from the $50 a year, but you know, we run a consulting business from our home, and I just wanted to add that I think compliance would be better if
Okay, guys?
This is essentially,
Tyler has got from Councillor Morse's motion, because I might just second it if I knew.
I'm just gonna add something else to it as Tyler's got it.
That council direct staff to start a discussion with TransLink about updating their feasibility study and looking to operating a passenger-only ferry from Bowen Island to downtown Vancouver.
So I'm wondering if we also need to, because that study reference, having, because TransLink, I mean, Squamish I know has also been considering it. But maybe that's enough to open the door, and with the North Shore study, then they could deal with BC Transit and TransLink and Squamish. Or maybe we just copy the resolution of
Actually,
Squamish.
guys, I think we've got it here. My apologies, my greatest apologies. I think our way in is the final statement of it. That in-step recommendation is to update the 2004 study to reassess the feasibility of additional passenger ferry service to get people to, from, and across the North Shore. So perhaps our way in is that we follow up on the in-step recommendation.
Well, if council moves this, then it's a clear, if
So
council
we-
passes this.
Read the motion again, Tyler.
That council direct staff to start a discussion with TransLink about updating their feasibility study and look into operating a passenger-only ferry from Bowen Island to downtown Vancouver.
As referred to,
As per the in-step recommendation.
as per the in-step recommendation. Was there a
On
number
page-
on that recommendation?
Let's just put page 18. for
As
now.
per the in-step report recommendation on page 18.
And then I'll second it.
Yeah, seconded.
Yeah, I'd like to wrap this up.
We can
We're-
tidy
we're
the
running
wording up
far,
a
far
little bit.
behind here. We've got a few things before we go into our committee of the whole, and we still have lunch and a closed meeting.
Yeah,
Uh,
We can eat lunch during the
So-
closed meeting.
Do we need any more on this?
just very quickly, we were out at the, David Hawkins was with me, we were out at the TransLink update, and, yeah, there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm at that point in time. But obviously we didn't get anything from the CAO, but there was definitely nothing in his speech, but we also broke into regional rooms, and there wasn't much forthcoming there either. They're very busy, and I think it has to be a collaborative project between BC Ferries, TransLink, and us, or whatever. And I think of one trip down there and one trip back is never gonna be
That's
good,
how West Coast
unfortunately.
Express
Okay,
started.
now we're going into detail.
Yeah,
All in
I'm done.
favor of the motion? Okay, that's passed unanimously.
Great.
Well done.
Sorry, I have to.
No, that's good.
Metro Vancouver report?
Yes, two things. The first relates to a resolution that we passed at our last meeting, and let me just bring it up here. It was resolution 18-373. It was moved and seconded that council send a letter to Metro Vancouver Regional Parks expressing its support of the annual Loggers Show being held at Crippen Park. Murray drafted a letter, sent it to me, I took a look at it, and I thought this seems weird. So I got in touch with Jeff Fitzpatrick at Metro and asked if it was the appropriate approach to send a letter to the Parks Committee. And he said, essentially, no, it's not necessary. This can be considered as a booking request, as any other booking request could be considered. I also spoke with Tom Cohn locally, and he and Gary have had that conversation. So both the local and Metro staff and the manager of Parks West say it's really not necessary. So I'd like to request to rescind that motion.
Well, is there any harm in sending a resolution to Metro Parks West to say we're supportive?
We could send it to Metro Parks West, but they said it's not necessary at all.
Well,
It's fine if they're going to do it anyway, we don't need to send it. But if they say it's not necessary and then they turn it down,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks a little silly in the eyes of the logging people.
I don't know how it could hurt if we just say, you know, they've been good tenants and they've done a lot of work
What
up
did our
there.
resolution say?
The
And-
resolution said,
Tom actually thought there should be a letter.
Huh?
I spoke with him, he said it wasn't
Wow.
necessary, now I have confirmation. The council sent a letter to Metro Vancouver Regional Parks expressing its support of the annual Logger Show. I mean, if you want to send a letter, send it to Jeff, not to the
Yeah, because
committee.
we said to regional parks, so I think we can just clarify that it's to going back to Parks West.
If you just change whatever I sent you to the appropriate person to send it to.
All
I
right,
wanted to talk to Gary Anderson about it, and I don't have his number handy, he doesn't have an email address, so I just haven't gotten to dealing with him. But I think maybe, Maureen, that's a better, and then, we've covered ourselves
Okay.
if something goes astray.
I'll
further
give you,
down the road.
I'll give you the number.
I've
Yeah.
got his number too.
Oh, okay, I'll give him a call.
I think he just wants something sent to Metro that we're supportive of.
Right,
So
Fair enough.
Metro Parks West is
we'll
fine.
just,
Can't hurt anything.
yeah, give me the number, we'll move on.
Yeah.
What's else?
the other thing is that, and I sent you all an email regarding this, that at the Friday Metro Vancouver board meeting, the board is being asked on the consent agenda, which is significant, on the consent agenda to write a letter in support of designating Bowen Island as an eligible rural community. So letters to Flinro regarding the BC Rural Dividend Program, Minister of Jobs, Trade and Technology regarding ICE-T, the Island Coast Economic Trust, and third letter to the Federal Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development with respect to Community Futures funding. And also to write a letter to Flinro and Rural Development requesting a review of the BC Rural Dividend Fund eligibility criteria, which specifically excludes communities within the Metro Vancouver Regional District. So the upshot of the correspondence that Murray and I sent to Chair Moore is that they are making this recommendation, and they're going one step further. So the report that is in the Friday agenda is worth looking at. They're going one step further and saying that there are other municipalities within Metro Vancouver that are negatively affected by the current definitions, and the point that's made is that perhaps this is too coarse a definition to actually serve its purpose, that it should be more granular and more respectful of the characteristics of the individual small communities. So this is a very good
Here,
outcome.
here. Yeah, that's
and
great.
let's hope that it is supported.
Okay. On to Islands Trust.
Islands Trust, just to report on the same topic, based on all of these groups and MPs and MLAs are looking at the motion that was passed by the Islands Trust Council, and CRD, the Capital Regional District, has already made those kinds of recommendations too. That's because of Salt Spring and the other southern Gulf Islands are down there in the same position as Bowen, not being eligible for most of the rural funding, although they've crept their way into some of it. We met on Keats Island as the Islands Trust Council, which is our neighbor just over there in Gambier Keats Trust area, last week.
And we luxuriated at a camp,
Yeah,
Oh, thanks.
which wasn't really a camp.
it was beautiful. The point is, we discussed a few amendments to the Islands Trust Act, so they're kind of updating it, that maybe the next Trust Council will take forward or maybe not. We talked about the advocacy that Islands Trust is doing for all islanders in the Islands Trust area. For example, Trans Mountain Pipeline advocacy is a big one right now, where we wrote to the Prime Minister. Most of us signed it. And affordable housing they're working on, and I'll just keep it quick. The last one, we had a presentation from our freshwater specialist. Many of the islands are having challenges with providing enough fresh water, and maybe not exactly now, but it's coming up soon, which is why we're making plans to help all the islands with different ways that we can protect our watersheds on the islands. That was our last council meeting, so that will go on in the next Trust Council.
All right.
So my resolution passed to amend the municipal pool calculation.
And we had some very interesting presentations. There was something on the Connected Coast Fiber Optics briefing, and some very interesting presentations from the Suzuki Foundation, from House on Biosphere, and all those PowerPoints will get posted to the Entrance website. So when we get them, we'll send them around because they are of some interesting mapping and things like that.
Okay, do Snug Cove House before we do items removed from the agenda. So where are we? You
Well,
had
just-
that brought up,
yeah.
Gary?
Just very quickly, I was in correspondence with Snug Cove House, and they've got a little bit of a problem. Obviously, with their zoning, which has been done in the land use bylaw for that piece of property, they are not understanding. They're in a position right now where they're hiring architects, designers, builders, everything. They want to get going on.
The property owner, purchasers are.
Purchasers, yes.
Yes, purchasers, yeah. And they've hit this roadblock where with the FSR, which is, there's absolutely no question that the legislation that is there is 100%, legal, and it's just the way it was supposed to be, and they've misunderstood it. I don't know where that misunderstanding came from. And, oh, there's Judy. I don't know where the misunderstanding came from, but, and I guess the only reason they wanted to bring it to council is to just, and it's not gonna really help because it's not gonna come to council or this council, but to get some idea of how council felt about this going forward, because they're gonna have to do a rezoning, there's no question, to get this clarified.
What? No.
Well, it's not, no.
You're jumping.
So, what would be the appetite, for this council? Obviously, it's just a straw poll of whether we would receive it at all.
Back up one and just ask Daniel for some
Well,
clarification. So 140 square meters is,
1,500 square feet.
okay, and we're talking about area 3 in this land use
Yeah.
bylaw,
Yeah.
right?
Right-hand
So
column.
140 square meters is 1,500 square feet?
Give or take, yeah.
Okay, so, and if I'm reading that, it says maximum size for attached dwellings detached, not including one parking space in an attached garage. So the 1,500 square meters, or square feet, doesn't include the attached garage?
Correct for that.
Okay, but where the hiccup is
The FSR.
in the FSR is for all buildings and structures, and that doesn't matter whether it's single family, single dwelling, or a duplex dwelling. The
Yeah.
0.85, so in the duplex lots, because they're bigger, the 0.85 is, or is the 0.85 is what's turning out to be the limiting factor?
Yeah.
Which means basically you're not being allowed to have, are there any of the lots where 1,500 square feet is less than 0.85?
So, sure, all of the lots
Yeah.
below.
They're all, if they're built as single families, I think, so even the top ones, like there's nothing in our zoning that says those top lots are duplex zones. We just allow a certain number of units, and they've subdivided it into a certain number of lots that they've internally, like Snug Cove House has delegated units to those, but
Okay.
in our zoning, so the top row of lots could be single family.
Okay, so my next understanding question then is the 1,500 square feet per dwelling or per building?
Per dwelling.
So 3,000 for duplexes? No. That's for dwelling. A duplex is 2 dwellings.
Yeah, so if, for example, those 6 lots on the north side of the internal road, if they instead subdivided those into 2 lots, and so they're each gonna be duplexes, their FSR, their lot size would be bigger, they'd be allowed more FSR because the lots would be bigger, and instead we would be capping them based on the size per dwelling. We would say, each of the dwellings can only be that 1,500 square feet, so it doesn't matter if your FSR lets you build more, that's your cap for your dwellings, but your garages can be additional to that. But because the lots are so small, they hit their FSR cap before they hit for a duplex, before they would hit both units being 1,500 square feet.
So they couldn't build 1,500 square feet regardless?
They could build one that's 1,500 square feet, and they could build one that's significant, they could build a 500 square foot unit and a 1,500 square foot unit, for example,
This is on the same lot.
on the same lot.
Okay, so all these bigger lots along this side
Yeah,
basically because they're wanting to put, they could have a 1,500 square foot single-family residence,
yeah.
but because of the size of the lot, they can't have two 1,500 square foot duplexes, so for a total of 3,000.
Yeah.
The FSR on those lots, if you just do the math, is.
No, I'm not asking about the FSR, I'm just saying if we didn't have any FSR limit, would they be able to build two 1,500 square foot duplexes based on the 35% floor area lot coverage? Or the 60% maximum lot coverage of all buildings and structures, 60%.
Like if we just didn't have the FSR,
Yeah.
then
Then they would be able
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
yeah.
If
I
you
mean, it's a
went,
limitation essentially.
if you went 3,000 square foot lot and
Well-
you covered 60% of that, right? So you're, say, at 1,800 square feet times 3 floors, you're up to almost 5,000 square feet. I mean, theoretically, you don't put any control on it. But I
Okay,
mean,
no, but I'm just trying to figure out, has anybody actually done the math
yeah,
as to
that
what
is
the 60% lot coverage would allow them?
I think that's what Judy was just gonna explain
Yeah,
to you.
and so they could have 1,500 square feet for each duplex on the 60%, but not because of the 0.85.
What's Judy say?
The lots on the north side are, about 258 square meters.
And how many square feet is that?
So,
almost 3,000, right?
yeah,
That's,
so,
that's the big ones,
so
Yeah.
on the west side.
those are, yeah, the lots 7 through 12.
Okay. Or 200,
About 258 square meters.
So their footprint could be 1,800 square feet, and that includes the garage.
May I just make a suggestion? Daniel sent us a message this morning
You did.
Oh, I didn't
regarding
get
this. And it's, the subject line is re-council agenda request. It might be useful for each of us to take a moment and read it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Judy.
Okay, so the bylaw is very clear.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
So
just a
I
question.
guess the whole question is,
Yeah,
was
bylaw's
that what
clear.
we intended when we passed the bylaw?
And I certainly was
I
thinking,
recall.
I was thinking, well, you put in, like, you don't need a 1,500 square foot unit for retired people, say you did 1,100 square feet, and then you did a 900 square foot, which would be,
Depends on your retirement.
as your two units, right? That takes you up to 2,000, then you got 500 square feet for the garage and the staircase, and Bob's your uncle, so why do you have to have two 1,500 square foot houses? Homes in there, and also it was their decision to make those lots only 3,000 square feet. They could have put 5 lots on that bench instead of 6, right? And with the FSR, it would have allowed them to have bigger individual units, and going up to both of them at 140. So, I mean, this is perfectly reasonable, good zoning, and it's exactly, as I recall the discussions, it's exactly what Judy laid out to us very clearly right from the beginning.
Well, I remember carports being talked about as not,
Yeah,
wouldn't count
and
anywhere, so
and
that-
also, I mean, you could just put parking spots in front of these things. These lots are actually quite deep, and you can, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do with your 2,500 square feet. But I'm not trying to tell planning how to do their job. All I'm getting at is that
This is clear.
because the person who wanted to do something decided to define it all in a particular way, doesn't mean that that's what's ultimately going to be built there. There's lots of choices, but I'm gonna go to Maureen first because she's had her hand.
Yeah, it's just, what's the question before us?
Well, I guess they wanted to be able to build something, so my other last question is, do those lots enable carports to be built instead
Yes.
of garages?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
So the-
And you could have an enclosed stairwell. for
And you
your-
can enclose 60% of that carport.
And part of that could be an enclosed stairwell for your
Yeah.
Stairmaster thing, or whatever it's called.
Yes.
Yeah, but again, we don't.
Which I've
we
also
don't
seen
have-
those outside, but
By the way,
Yeah.
I, yeah.
don't know if that's.
We don't need to get into it.
It's not theoretical in as much that these lots have been substantially already sold.
Yes.
And what the people who we have supported throughout have faced, their reality is, they're faced with people who made a commitment to them and they've made a commitment to these people, right?
No, I have to interject there. This isn't the way it was portrayed to me. I mean, this started with a phone call from me, and I phoned Raj, got people all excited about this thing, but the bottom line is that, anybody who purchased that lot had this piece of paper in hand. If you looked at the marketing stuff, which I had, it said maximum buildable was going to be 2,500 and some square feet. I think it was 2,550. And that's what these people bought, very, very knowingly. For anybody to say afterwards, oh, but you should be able to do this, it just doesn't fly.
Is that your point?
Well, I mean, looking at the schematics, I'm trying to help people. It's not Cove House who faced this issue. Because we all know why it's not Cove Houses. We all know the history, so I won't elaborate on that. So as a practical way forward, because anything else at this juncture is not particularly helpful, they can at least build these carports as Gary described.
Yeah.
Then I suppose once the carports are built and we're saying, oh my goodness, this is not what we want to see. People like all this for aesthetic points. Then, for a subsequent council, if they want to make an application to whatever,
To fill those carports in.
then that, but at least they need a premise on which to move ahead, because
The carports are gonna be there anyway.
Yeah.
If they wanna come to the next council and say, hey, listen, we wanna close those things in, and put a covenant on those and say you can't live in there. Yeah, so all you're doing is cleaning up the front of it, that's basically what it is. But the covenant has to come with the rezoning, and that's gonna take time, and that's not what they've got right now. So that's their option, and I just wanted to, and thank you for that, I just wanted to run by council and get some feedback. For the record, and Judy, thank you, and.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that everybody understood the facts.
They did.
Yeah.
There's no-
Well, with us here at the table.
there's
I don't think
no
there's any
question
villains
in my
in this
mind.
story.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
End of discussion.
Maureen pulled 3.6.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just very brief, and it's regarding the recommendation, that Emma's discussion of this makes it clear that there's the expectation that the costs are going to be reimbursed by BC Hydro.
Yes.
And I would just like the recommendation to include that statement as well. So I propose an amendment to the recommendation that council approve an $8,000 capital expenditure in 2018, comma, cost to be reimbursed by BC Hydro, comma, for the purchase of two level 2, etc. I just would like it reflected.
I think the reason it's not reflected that way is because there is not a guarantee.
Oh.
I mean, an absolute
This says
guarantee,
commitment.
right? There's a commitment. And so there is a slight risk that it may not get reimbursed. And again,
Okay, well, maybe
so.
reword it as costs are expected to be reimbursed.
But that doesn't fit in the recommendation. I mean,
But do you see my point, though?
How
Yeah,
about aware
yeah,
of?
yeah.
How about aware of?
Yeah.
With the expectation of reimbursement.
so the other side of the coin could be, we approve the expenditure of the 8,000 subject to receiving a grant confirmation that BC Hydro will reimburse it.
Yeah, I mean, well, Ross, you explained the
We,
complexity.
now Emma can correct me, Emma, we've got an email commitment from them, but we don't, beyond that, we don't have a written agreement that they are going to reimburse us, and I don't believe they are willing to go beyond an email commitment. So I believe the email commitment is assurance that we will be committed, that we will be reimbursed, but there is a chance they could go back and say, well, it doesn't fit within our it's unlikely, but there is a minimal risk that we won't get reimbursed, and it's only for the purchase of those, charger units.
Just let me clarify one thing. This is part of a larger project for them, right? So this is a community amenity type of thing that they have room in their budget and they're saying that they're going to do this. I think that if it all fell apart, we might end up sending the units back because we didn't pay the invoice. I don't know. But I don't believe that it is substantive. I talked to Jerry Muir about it, getting confirmation, and he explained where the money was coming from and how it was doing it. And so we do have the email with that undertaking, and let's face it, in their world, $8,000 is 15 cents.
Rounding error.
I wouldn't get overly concerned that this is going to provide a bite.
It's just that we have never, in my recollection, passed a recommendation where we haven't specified the source of the funds.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, you're probably quite right.
So that's, to be funded, that's what I'm saying, if we put in to be funded by BC Hydro, to be offset by a grant from BC Hydro, or.
Could we say cost expected
it's
to
an-
be?
Sorry, I was just gonna interject, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
but
go
as an
ahead.
I was just gonna say, we can put it as an external funding source.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should be specific in the recommendation and put BC Hydro, because they don't want
Yes.
that to be setting any precedent or
So-
anything
so
like that. for the
that's my
community.
question
Yeah.
is,
So I
Do
think,
we want to spend this $8,000 if we don't get an external funding source?
well,
Because the way the motion's worded right now.
Says we are.
we basically have to spend the money before we get reimbursed, so the money will be spent. If the external funding source doesn't, it's very likely,
Yeah.
but if it does not materialize,
Where's
and
the
we've
money
already
coming from?
purchased it, then that purchase will have to be funded from our internal resources.
Do we have money do we have $8,000 surplus kicking around in the budget to fund it?
We
Or are
have
we gonna
equipment
end up in a-
reserves and other sources that we would have to look for to fund it in the event the external funding didn't
So then
materialize.
maybe we need to, in the motion, say if the external funding does not materialize, it will be funded from the equipment replacement or some reserve.
Next year's CARE refund.
Well, the CARE refund's being spent on something else.
Well, next year's, that's what I said.
So that's my other question, is, will this get purchased by the end of 2018? Does it have to be done then, or is?
It has to be done by the end of 2018,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
Okay, how about the council approve an $8,000 capital expenditure in 2018 to be funded by an external source or municipal reserves
Yes,
Yeah, perfect.
for the purchase of loan?
that works.
Yeah, I second that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All in favor?
Yeah.
Done. Moving right along.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And when are the installation costs expected to be substantial?
Too late.
Depends where they go.
I think we're looking, depends on where it goes, exactly.
Whether you have to put another power pole, whether you pull it
Yeah,
off the
so,
building, et
so
cetera, et
before
cetera.
we make the final decision, I mean, 8,000 may be peanuts, but we might be looking at 20,000 or 30,000 for installation costs?
No.
But 10 or 12, I don't know, just pick a number. But the,
So if,
They'll have
if
the
the
multi-
installation costs look really high, then staff will be coming back to us and giving us some caution.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
that'd
maybe
be
we'll put them on some private property.
Yeah.
We'll get
yeah.
BC Ferries to put them in. Part of their
Trans-
transit.
Translink.
Whereas there's no place to park down there.
Put it in the scooter shed. Anyway,